Voluntary portion of Bills offseason workouts coming to an end. Mandatory work just ahead with mandatory minicamp just around the corner. We got a lot to get to this week. I'm Kevin Carroll. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone podcast.
And I am Andy Young. Spring football transitioning towards summer football. Only one more week to go of Bills workouts, then the little break, and then we're getting ready for training camp. It's coming fast and furious.
Yeah, I don't think that break's going to be too little. You know, we, Andy and I like to have a guest on. We've been trying to get Greg Tompsett from Cover One on the last few weeks. He is joining us this week as we bring him in to go over all we've seen at organized team activities and everything else you want to throw at the wall. Greg, you're from the Faulkner area in Western New York. You're familiar with the Bills for a long time. Your forte, the salary cap, which I'm not even close to. That's not even on my roadmap. So we always love to have someone on who can enlighten me. Maybe Andy knows a little bit more than me, but great to have you with us today. Thanks for coming on.
I appreciate it. It means a lot. Excited we were able to find a good time to record here and being able to be there. I love your Jamestown Tarp Skunks shirt. I will say I'm from the Jamestown Expos era. I got to see Delano DeShields. I got to see Randy Johnson.
Nice.
I got to see a good run there for a little bit. But now that they're, the beloved Tarp Skunks, I got to represent Jamestown. I like the Southern Tier pride.
I got this hoodie the day before COVID hit, so it didn't see much action right off the bat.
Greg, you'll appreciate this. I went to a Jamestown Jammers camp after they switched from the Expos to the Jammers and got hit in the back of the head with a bat. Somebody was taking practice swings and got a concussion. So
that's because you're so close to the action.
Hey, good times.
That's the kind of guy you are right there, right in there, in the fray.
Yeah, Greg and I grew up about 10 minutes apart from each other. I'm from Frewsburg. He's from Faulkner. He's a couple years older than me, but, we ran in some of the same circles. So that's
I know Frewsburg, Andy. We could talk about Jamestown, Chautauqua Lake, and I could talk about that for hours on end, especially now it's warm out. Love sitting on Chautauqua Lake, but let's dive into the Bills. I think that's what everyone's here for. Everyone was looking at that June 1st, Tre'Davious White. The Bills did what we all thought that they were going to do, Greg. I don't know if I'm speaking out of school or if I'm sounding like a moron here, but with signing all their draft picks right after that June 1st deadline hit was expected, and now Trey White is officially off the books.
Yeah, obviously one of the more difficult emotional ones out of those moves on Wednesday. On the field, I think a lot of people were unsure what we were going to get there, but just an awesome personality, and now seeing him off the books, the Bills cleared up some of that money to make some of these moves, and I know fans are hopeful that there's a couple other big moves coming, but at least they got some of those other machinations in motion to be able to get the draft picks in play and now set themselves up to be able to get ready for training camp.
I don't mean to keep cutting you off, Andy, but for the layman out there, what is the point of that June 1st deadline? And I know a lot of people have asked me. I don't have the answer. Or at least an intelligent one.
So it used to be a much bigger deal. I think they've done a nice job. It used to actually be a pretty big penalty for the players, because if you think about the old function where Trey White wouldn't actually become a free agent until today, but you look at all the other teams that have filled their roster, used up their cap space, it was a pretty big detriment to the players. The reason it's a big deal for the teams is once you go over June 1st, the NFL lets you share the money of how much those dead cap hits can be between this year and next season. They let you kind of split the money out depending on what the guarantees were, how much money you're talking about. So that's the reason it matters for teams. Once you get past June 1st, you can share some of the dead cap hit between this season and next season. Obviously, that comes into play with the trade of Stephon Diggs. It happened prior to June 1st, so all of the money hits this year. For Trey White, they waited, which creates about $10 million in cap space this year. That's because next year you're going to see his name on the salary cap still, because they spread some of that money into 2025. So that's why it matters for teams. It was a really nice adjustment in the last CBA where they let teams start to designate when you're a post-June 1st cut, so the player gets to become a free agent and gets to get out there while there's money in the market and teams haven't filled up their roster. So I think that's actually one of the better compromises they've made to get the best of both worlds for the players and for the teams. But Trey White was the only one that the team chose to do that this year because there was a little bit more benefit in doing it. One of the downsides was you don't get that cap space until June 1st, which is why we saw, I actually think the Bills were maybe the last team to sign for sure their day 3 pick. So every other 5th, 6th, and 7th round pick in the NFL had been signed already. The Bills were the last one to do that because we were that close to the cap. We needed the money.
So, Greg, looking at the salary cap right now, they've got a little less than $10 million in space. Is that where you have them at?
Yeah, and I think that, there are some tools you can look at in the summer when there's 90 guys on the roster, 91 because of the exception for Travis Clayton. You obviously can't have a salary cap with 90 salaries. So they use a rule in the summer that's called the Rule of 51 or the top 51 contracts. Those are the only ones that count against the salary cap. They do 51 because they know once you get to the season, some of the draft picks and some of the cheaper guys are going to make it. And a lot of the veterans cost a little bit more because their veteran minimum is higher than a 6th or 7th round pick. So they do it as 51. I think smart teams, especially if you're close, you can't necessarily just use that number because you know what's coming in season. Brandon Beane talks about that in his press conferences. So technically, they have a little over $10 million right now, but realistically, that number is going to come down because some of those players you release, everyone has a little bit of guaranteed money. For a Chase Claypool or a Casey Toohill, it's like $15,000 or $25,000. That's not a big deal. But some guys got, $90,000, $100,000, $150,000. When you're releasing, 53 from 91, so you're talking about 38 players that are getting released. All those little bits of guaranteed money add up. You then have to sign them to the practice squad. That money adds up. All the times you have to elevate a guy from the injured reserve or put a guy in injured reserve and elevate a guy from the practice squad, that 1/18th of a minimum salary, that guy's on the active roster that week. He counts as whatever that game check is towards a salary cap. Brandon Beane likes to have $4 to $5 million for that kitty back and forth for those transactions. So I think that combination, I think realistically, he probably has about $5 million to work with. Like if he wanted to go out and make a move, make a trade, make a signing, he could do other things. Ed Oliver could be restructured. Connor McGovern could be restructured. There's a couple little things you could play around with to make a little bit more space. But realistically, right now, I think he has $5 million in spendable money.
So what do we do with that $5 million, Greg? That's the big question right now. Again, it's the spring. You look at the Bills roster. Everything is all happy. Everything looks great out there. The future looks bright. You got that $5 million. You see areas that need to be taken care of still.
So the hard part is that the position everybody's mind goes to. Everybody wants a wide receiver. Maybe some people want a pass rusher. Those are the two most common. The challenge is 2 of the most recent deals they made really look like guys who are going to make the roster. Marquez Valdes-Scantling's getting like $2.25 million. He can earn up to like $4.5 million if he hits his incentives. He got a decent chunk of guaranteed money. So that's not, we've seen it once in the Brandon Beane tenure where he signed a guy with legit guaranteed money in the same offseason and then he got released. That was O.J. Howard. That was more age and injury related. I think that's been an exception. For the most part, when Brandon Beane gives out $1 million plus, $2 million plus in guaranteed money, that guy's making the roster. A sneaky one was Dwayne Smoot. Now, I like Dwayne Smoot. I actually think he's a sneaky good player. 4 straight seasons of 5+ sacks while he was in Jacksonville. Last year, recovering from the Achilles injury he had the end of the year before. I think they're both good players. They're not the flashy names people wanted. They're not the high-end guys even that I would have wanted. But both of them got enough guaranteed money that it makes me wonder, are they going to go out there? There's some names in the marketplace. Yannick Ngakoue is still a pass rusher. That would be very similar to a Leonard Floyd type signing we saw last June. I'd still be happy about that, but whose spot does he take? You have A.J. Epinesa, you have Gregory Rousseau, you have Von Miller, you drafted Javon Solomon, you signed Dwayne Smoot. That's 5 defensive ends already, not even counting Kingsley Jonathan or Jonathan Kingsley. They're not even counting some of the other guys competing for those later spots. So you could bring in a guy, but now one of those guys who got guaranteed money is going to get cut. I didn't even count Casey Toohill, who had 5 sacks last year. At receiver, we did spend money on Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and then we have the former second-round pick grab bag competing for wide receiver 6 at, whoever of Andy Isabella, Chase Claypool, KJ Hamler, all those guys competing, maybe even a sneaky guy like a Xavier Johnson. But Matt Collins and Marquez Valdez-Scantling are making this team. Like, we have 5 receivers that are already locked in there and to compete. So, I would love to see a guy at either of those spots. I've kind of just accepted that I don't think I'm going to. I think corner is the sneaky one. I think cornerback is one where there is a spot there. I know the team, does like Jamarcus Ingram. They obviously have expectations. Maybe a fresh start with a new coach could be beneficial for Kaiir Elam, but I think cornerback's one where we could be sneaky. Maybe somebody like a Dory Jackson who has return ability could compete in that space plus have outside corner ability. I don't expect like a Stephon Gilmore or something like that, but that's one spot that might be a sneaky one.
Greg, there's been a lot of talk, and you brought it up, wide receiver, and a lot of fans are hopeful that they could make even a bigger splash. Is there room in the way that Brandon Beane has manipulated the salary cap for them to possibly make a trade for a big name right now, have some of that cap space be lower in the first year, that cap number be lower in the first year, and then it escalates into next year when there is more salary cap space?
So 2 things. One, you have to have the salary cap space to take on the existing contract as is. So we'll use like a T. Higgins. Like, you have to have $21.4 million or whatever his franchise tag number is to accept that and then restructure it.
Right.
There are some exceptions. If you have a team that's willing to eat some salary to do it, that would be more like a Denver. Maybe they'd be willing to eat some money to move off of Cortland Sutton. Good teams with good players don't need to eat money. And if they're going to trade him, they'll trade him to somebody else where they don't have to eat money. Or you're going to have to give such a premium draft pick to get them to eat the money that it'll make it cost prohibitive. Now, with that said, I often, the salary cap is very real, but it's pretty flexible. Like, you can do a lot. So my normal, besides a quarterback, I normally put it out there. Any team can acquire any player if they really want to. Like, if you really want to, you can figure it out. So there are some limits to that. Right now, the position they're in, I genuinely don't know if they could go get a T. Higgins. Like, that $20 million number would be really hard to get to. But let's say I know Brandon Ayuk is a name that comes up all the time, Deebo Samuel, other flashy names. Again, I don't expect any of those transactions, but let's hypothetically play with that. You have $10 million-ish now. If you restructure Ed Oliver, you get to $3.8 million of that. Now you're at $14 million. You're already at $14 million. I think Brandon Ayuk's number is like 14.4. You go in, you restructure one or two other guys, Matt Milano, or maybe somebody else you don't really want to mess with, like a Tyler Bass or a Von Miller or someone. Hopefully you don't have to touch those. You can go in, make that space, and then, Andy, what you brought up, then you get the cap space right back. Once you reach the extension, you redo the deal, you lower that first year cap hit, you spread out the money into future years, but you do have to make room for that transaction in the first place to get them. So there are some players that, I know before the extension, some people had a crazy pipe dream that we were going to go get Justin Jefferson. He would have been one of the ones that I think I had to go through and restructure 14 different players to try to make the space to do it. But even that example, if you really, really want to, they can find a way.
You mentioned Justin Jefferson, so I'm going to bounce around here. When looking at the wide receivers, what does that mean for these other wide receivers out there looking for big-time contracts?
It's a crazy number. So one, Justin Jefferson's awesome. He is a fantastic player. He's worth every single penny. Holy crap, that's a lot of money. Like $140 million, $35 million per season. I did the same thing when Bosa got his, which was $34 million, and it apparently mattered to Justin Jefferson. He wanted to be the highest paid non-quarterback. Those two are awesome, awesome players. It's just a new reality. When you have an elite game-impacting player, you got to do what it takes to sign them. I think we're going to see Micah Parsons up in that range. I think we're going to, I don't think CD Lamb is quite as good as Justin Jefferson. So now it's going to become like the quarterback market. So I think it's going to be a little bit closer to what the initial one was with Patrick Mahomes, where when Mahomes signed his deal, I think it was 46. You saw several other quarterbacks be like, okay, and the teams were like, well, you're not Patrick Mahomes, but you're really good. So Josh Allen, here's $43 million. You're going to come in just below that. And you saw a couple of those numbers where, okay, that sets the market, but nobody can rightfully ask for more money than him. So you're going to come in just below there. I think that's the logical one where maybe we now see 33.5, 34, 34.5 becoming more of a normal number. But maybe we see it like we have with the more recent quarterback market where, hey, once a guy got 50, well, then somebody else wanted 50.5 and then 51 and then 51.5 and 52 and literally $500,000 at a time all the way up to now 55 million. And you see guys where it's, okay, I get it when it's Lamar Jackson, when it's Joe Burrow, but now it's Jared Goff. It's guys who are, I think universally seen as good, but like a full tier or two below those other guys. So I don't have any question that the CD Lambs and the Micah Parsons of the world are going to get that huge money. The question's going to come in when it's the next tier below there, and you've already seen that. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think is a really nice player, but he's an awesome slot receiver, possession receiver. I don't think anybody sees him as like the game-changing guy like a Jefferson, and he got a huge deal. So Jalen Waddle just got a huge deal. Now wide receiver twos are getting $28 million. It's not a bad time to be resetting your clock at the wide receiver position to try to invest and take advantage of some of that cheap rookie money.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting conversation about the way certain teams are constructing their rosters. And there's kind of a dichotomy happening right now where you've got teams like the Bills, who kind of divested from the big money wide receiver. The Chiefs have kind of done that. But then you have teams like Miami with Hill and Waddle, teams like the Eagles with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And they're paying their quarterbacks. Miami still might have to pay Tua Tagovailoa as well. So, Greg, how do you view the way kind of teams are managing this now that the wide receiver market has really soared? And you mentioned it. Some teams are paying wide receiver twos even more than wide receiver ones were making just a couple of years ago. What's the way to navigate that?
So the interesting one, there are two teams that are trying to do both, and that's the really interesting part. I think it makes sense that when you have a rookie quarterback, you surround them with elite talent that raises the floor, and that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. Once you establish that that quarterback is a franchise quarterback, you then spread the money around. You don't invest in as much elite talent because you're paying the quarterback elite money, and he's the rising tide that lifts all boats. I think that's the model that makes the most sense. I do think there's exceptions when you have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I think you try to keep Jamar Chase. I think it might be the reason that T. Higgins isn't there long term, but we'll see how that plays out. The interesting two are Philly and Miami, and I think that's where now you have quarterbacks who are getting paid like franchise quarterbacks. Two is about two. I think it's just a formality. But you're also paying two elite wide receivers. Both Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown have huge deals. I think those are an average annual value of $60 million combined. I think it's like 32 and 28. It's pretty similar with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Now, some of that, the Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle one is relative because none of Jalen Waddle's real big money is going to hit until after Tyreek Hill is off the books. So that'll net out better than Bills fans are hoping for, unfortunately. But you're still going to be talking about huge money there and Tyreek Hill, huge money. And now you're getting into that Jared Goff conversation of, hey, that's what it costs to keep those guys, but are they that rising tide that lifts all boats? Can they be the reason you win because of, not just a high-end can win with model? And I think that's right now, I don't know that either of those guys have proven that per se. I do think that there's still some to be shown. It's very clear that you can win with players like Jared Goff, Brock Purdy, Jalen Hurts, and Tua Tagovailoa. I don't know that anyone sees them as the driver of what you're going to win because of. And I don't think it's an accident that those teams are paying elite talent around those guys. But now there's going to be a lot of sacrifice when you're talking about 110 million plus at quarterback and your top 2 receivers. That is a huge one. And one topic, just as an aside here, I think you're seeing some other teams find right now the cheat code in modern NFL offense, I think, is the premium tight end. Where guys who I think are just as impactful as some of those receivers, you see the impact that Travis Kelce, that Mark Andrews, that heck, last year Sam Laporta, those guys have. And the very, very best guys barely break 15 million, and now you're having wide receiver 2s paid double that. I think that's a cheat code right now that teams are trying to lean into. At some point here, I think that market's going to inch its way up and take advantage, but I think right now that's a lot of smart teams are leaning into that, and it makes sense to go after elite tight ends because they make like half the money.
Do you feel like that's what the Bills have in mind with Dalton Kincaid?
It's not an accident. I do. We'll see. I think obviously people compare way too much to Travis Kelce. That's completely unfair. He's the greatest receiving tight end in NFL history.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, if you go back and look at some of those Baltimore offenses, even during Lamar Jackson's MVP year, you can run a very successful modern offense with your number 1 target being a tight end. And Mark Andrews had some really nice seasons there. And if you go back and look at a target breakout goal, Mark Andrews, number 2, his second season, I think was 68 catches for 880 yards and 10 touchdowns. That'd look also awful nice in Buffalo this year.
Speaking of that, we haven't had a chance to talk to you about Joe Brady now. Became offensive coordinator midway through last season. Now he's getting the full off season to kind of implement his offense. We heard from him a week ago about this is Josh Allen's offense. We're not going to throw a lot out there that's going to take away from his game. But we do expect more from Dalton Kincaid. He had a very good rookie season, but more from him. And now with younger wide receivers and Stephon Diggs now out of the mix, Joe Brady now tasked with keeping this offense up near the top of the league with what they have right now, not knowing, again, we'll leave that $5 million to the side and just talk about the here and now. But with what Joe Brady's working with right now, and his task is to keep this team at an elite level on the offensive side of the ball.
So I do think, obviously, no one should try to make the argument that this offense is better without Stephon Diggs. It's clearly not. He was an elite player, and we did not replace him. So I don't think that there should be any argument that we're better without him, because we're not. Like that, I want to make that very, very clear. I do think you can make a case that the receiving core, with advancements that we expect, so that this is baking in a material step forward from a Dalton Kincaid, a material step forward from a Khalil Shakir, the addition of Curtis Samuel, the draft of Keon Coleman, the addition of Marcus Valdes-Scantling and Mac Hollins. I do think you can make an argument maybe this receiving core is deeper than what it was before. Obviously, there was, Gabe Davis became a very polarizing player. I was a big fan of his, but I get why some people were very, felt very strongly about his consistency. And then we saw, a pretty big whiff in the acquisition of Deontay Hardy, some of the hopes of Trent Sherfield, some of those other pieces. I do think that, people throw around that Moneyball quote from Brad Pitt playing Brandon Beane, where you guys are trying to replace Giambi. We can't stop. Mm-hmm. What we can do is recreate him in the aggregate. And if you go through and look at, we're not going to have anybody have 160 targets. But if you spread those around and have a whole bunch of other guys where there's not this huge drop-off after him, and then you add up the top 4, targets, catches, yards, touchdowns last year, and spread that around. I did that exercise in one, and you look at what the production would need to be of the top 4 this year. It's easier to replace than what you realize. It's not as dramatic of step forwards from everybody else when you don't need there to be this huge number 1 target when it's spread around more. They're all very realistic stat lines from each of those guys. And I think most people have it pretty clearly with Kincaid, Shakir, Samuel, and Coleman. And that's not including that I think we probably get a little bit more from our wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 5 this year. Maybe you see a little bit more from James Cook this year. Ray Davis was actually a really nice screen player at Kentucky. I think that maybe you see a little sprinkle of that here or there. There was very little production last year from Dawson Knox as he worked back and was dealing with the passing of his brother and all the different pieces there. Maybe we see a little bit of a bounce back from Dawson Knox production. I do think I think there's a little lip service to the everybody eats mantra and all that kind of stuff. That's part of that's just lip service of like, hey, we're not going to tell you what the offense is. Right. But I do think there's some sincerity to it in that it's not going to be as defined as it was last year, where we knew Steph was going to lead the team in targets almost every single game. Whereas this year, I do think you could see, if I had to bet money on it right now, I'd guess that Kincaid leads the team in targets more games than not. But if you told me there were 5 different guys who had the most targets in a game this year, I'd believe you. Like, I think that that's way more in play, and I do not think we have anybody into that 160 target range. If Dalton Kincaid gets 120, I think that would be a huge season for him. But I won't be shocked if it's even, barely above 100. I don't think that would be crazy.
Mm-hmm. Greg, you'll be happy to know that our YouTube user, Now Move Ova, says, Greg Tompsett, I love you, in the comments.
Wow.
Yeah.
We've never got a love.
Appreciate that.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff.
My mom says I'm very lovable.
Yeah.
We'll switch gears to what's going on at OTAs right now, Andy, and I'm going to start with you because you're the one who talked to one of the newest Bills, Gable Steveson, wrestler. Mm-hmm. So now we have another non-football player going to the Bills. You got a chance to catch up with him. I know I was around some people that were pretty excited when this move came down for no other reason than what this guy brings with his wrestling background and Sean McDermott's link to wrestlers.
Yeah, I talked to Gable Steveson over the weekend at Harrison Phillips' Playmakers event. Those two are buddies from Minnesota. Gable Stevenson's from Minnesota. Obviously, Harrison Phillips now playing for the Vikings. They've got to know each other, and so he was in town. And Stevenson's an interesting dude in that he's never played football before, never played organized football. And the Bills signed him to a 3-year rookie contract to come in as a free agent and try to compete. Obviously, he has top-end athleticism, right? He's an Olympic gold medalist. He's a 2-time NCAA heavyweight champ. He's put on 10 pounds, he told me, in the couple of weeks since his tryout to signing, just lifting more, eating more, that the Bills wanted him to do. He's hoping that his skills in wrestling, and Greg, you can attest to this as a former wrestler, can translate to the football field in terms of hand fighting, leverage, agility, quickness, those sorts of things. But he certainly has an uphill climb for anybody who thinks that like he's going to make the 53-man roster or maybe even the practice squad. I think that would be the ultimate goal, is to get him on the practice squad. But what can you say about his ability to try and at least give this a shot to get on the practice squad?
So there are some correlations here. I don't know that there's very many that never played football, but there are some. Like, we've seen that. So obviously the Patriots made famous Stephen Neal, who is very, very similar in a multiple national champ from Cal Bakersfield. Wasn't actually an Olympic caliber guy, but was a multiple-time heavyweight champ. The famous Dante Scarnecchia carved him into like a 10-year starter for the Patriots at guard. You've seen Jordan Mailata is now one of the highest paid tackles in the NFL. He was a rugby player, had never played American football. People need to remember Jordan Mailata is the best case scenario. Him, Stephen Neal, those are the two best case scenarios that you could possibly come across of the very high end outlier outcome here. There's way more Christian Wades than there are Jordan Mailatas. Jordan Mailata didn't touch the field for 2 years. He didn't play for his first 2 seasons. In his 3rd year, he finally started to be able to play. So I think patience is the key. However, I will use the Jordan Mailatas, the Stephen Neals. Antonio Gates didn't play college football and came in and became a Hall of Fame player. When you are a world-class athlete, the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, like that, which is what Gable Steveson is, like the physicality and explosion and power at, I don't know if he's 6'1", but 6 foot. I think he's now up to 280, but he was 6 foot 275, doing not backflips, but doing like Olympic gymnastics backflips where he's way up off the ground. Like, how the heck did that man of that size get up into the air? And what he did to other elite world-class athletes as a heavyweight champion, and a guy who's 23, just turned 24 a couple days ago. That hand fighting, that core explosion, that physical skill set, that is what would translate. Like, that is the idea. So anyone thinking he makes the 53-man roster this year is crazy. The best case scenario is a Jordan Mailata path. And this same conversation applies for Travis Clayton, who is also a crazy world-class athlete. Making the practice squad this year to maybe have a shot at the 53-man roster next year is the best case scenario. But when you're talking about that kind of crazy high upside of the physical skill set and traits, that's where it can pan out. And that's where you see the Jason Peters of the world, who had never played left tackle before, and they moved him. Again, Jordan Mailata, Stephen Neal, Antonio Gates. There are guys that have made that transition after not playing, organized football at that highest level. It's very rare, but it is possible, and I do think those are the kind of guys that it can pan out. So I'm not putting any eggs in that basket, but I won't lie, I'm excited to see him in training camp and preseason.
I just have to wonder how somebody who's never played football, like I played football through high school, just to have that basic understanding of like terminology and stances and alignment, like that you get from like midget football through high school, to not even have that as a foundation to get started is crazy to me. I saw Sean McDermott at OTAs on Tuesday really pulling him aside and working with him one-on-one, the assistant defensive line coach, same thing, really just kind of showing him where to line up. Yeah, like McDermott loves that, and just to see that, like, I don't know how you make that transition. Obviously having the athleticism and the drive and work ethic to get to those points obviously helps, but to just have no idea what anything is out there, it's just crazy to me.
Keep it simple for a few years. Right. Let them get up to speed.
Did you guys see the quote from Bobby Babich? I want to see if I can find it. He was asked about signing him, and his exact quote was, "I think we know our head coach's background and his passion for that sport."
Right.
So you can tell there's a little bit of a pet project here, maybe from the head guy.
Speaking of Bobby Babich, taking center stage this week as the new defensive coordinator, we hear from him for the first time. Andy, you were there, obviously excited at the position, the opportunity. We still don't know if he's actually calling defensive plays, but from what you hear from him, Andy, it seems like he for sure will have definitely a hand in the defensive plays and calls at certain times. I just kind of took that away from the press conference itself.
Yeah, I mean, he was asked about the play calling, and that's been the hot topic since the move was made, and Sean McDermott has been asked about it several times throughout this process, and he basically said, ask me, during training camp. Ask me through the preseason. We're going to kind of sort that out. I think I don't think it's lip service. I think they're trying to figure out exactly how that's going to work. I'm sure during OTAs, during minicamp, during training camp, McDermott's going to give him a shot to call some plays and see how that goes. Maybe they'll do a little bit of mix of both. He mentioned that he has been prepared as he possibly can be without having the ego to know that he won't make mistakes and that you're never ready for it until you actually do it. And that's kind of the thing that I think people remember back to when Ken Dorsey became a first-time play caller, and he kind of said the same thing, like, I don't know exactly how it's going to go because I've never done it. It could go well, could go great for him. He could get the shot, or McDermott takes it still, or it could go the way Dorsey went. Now, obviously, I don't think Dorsey, maybe got as fair a shake as he could have the way things went last year for him. But it's an interesting thing to have a first-time play caller on the defensive side of the football.
Keep in mind, Sean McDermott also took over the defensive calls while Leslie Frazier was there.
Yeah, he did.
It wouldn't be unfounded for Babich to have that role, but have Sean McDermott start jumping in when he sees need be. He's the head coach. We're not going to say his job's on the line, but there were times last year where we talked about it, and I still think this year Sean McDermott is going to be pretty heavy-handed with this team with what the next step is everyone wants them to take, because right now they're becoming almost a version of the Bengals, get to the postseason every year but never really do much once you get there. Bengals might be a bad example because I don't think they won a game.
Well, but it still shows. I think my read of that situation is their plan is for Babich to call the plays, but that there's no benefit in putting that out there and putting all that pressure onto him. And that I think McDermott likes the idea of like, hey, I want to see if he can do it, because until you do it, you don't know. And Babich matched that in his questions here. Like, he has every intention. He's put in all the work. He's as prepared as anyone can be. But until he does it with live bullets flying, you just don't know. So I think they're saying all the right things, but my interpretation of everything I've seen now marrying up with the most recent comments there is their intention and plan is for him to do that. They just want to see him prove it and show that he can.
Yeah, Von Miller, no knee brace. That's the other hot topic coming out of OTAs, and Andy looking for more from him than what we got. Yeah, he's returning from an ACL injury. You can't expect much, but when you have a guy like Von Miller, you kind of hope that you're going to get that much, but now maybe closer to reality now.
Yeah, I think it's a lot to ask to say at his age that he's going to be exactly like he was before the ACL injury, but the Bills have to hope on hope that he's not where he was the first, 13, 14 games of last season that he played, because once he came back after that month, that the last 3 games or so, he started to show some flashes of what Von Miller could be. And I think he alluded to that yesterday in his press conference at OTAs, is that his best 3 games of last season were the last 3 games, and that you saw some flashes, some glimpses of where he was. No knee brace. He said that was really a struggle for him last season, wearing that knee brace and feeling like the knee was in good shape. If they can get some semblance of Von Miller, that's a win, because what he gave last year just simply wasn't good enough, and you're going to be counting on him. He's one of your top 4 defensive ends, edge rushers, Greg.
Yeah, it's, obviously I think he became a bit of a pariah, some of that on his own, some of that just by the nature of the contract, some of that, in the different pieces there. I do think because of that kind of negative slant that came around him, I think people maybe missed the fact that he actually looked pretty good at the end of the year. And we started to see some of those flashes, some of that bend that we hadn't really seen in a bit. And I think on both sides of it, one, it's not fair to expect him to be that pre-injury level. But people have to realize that pre-injury level was still really, really high in like an elite pass rusher. So 80-90% of that is still a very good contributing player. Now, is that going to be worth the contract? Is there going to be a value? No, we've passed that point that there's no scenario where this is going to be a good contract or a good value. That doesn't mean he can't contribute. That doesn't mean that there won't be positive contributions as a pass rusher as part of this rotation and still have an impactful season. And I think the fact that he had, honestly, a pretty optimistic view in how he restructured that contract, that he gives up a lot of money if he doesn't have a contributing season, is as good of a bet as what I've seen, in that he's betting on himself to have that kind of impact.
All right. Before we go, we like to do something we call 3 and Out here, Greg. 3 topics. Sometimes they're football related. Sometimes they're not.
This guy's slick, too. You got to watch what he
Sometimes there's
here.
3 of them. Sometimes there's a lot more. But we'll just start off with semi-Bills related. One of the things floating around yesterday, Stephon Diggs' comments, first time speaking down with the Houston Texans on going to the Texans, his thoughts on Josh Allen, the Josh Allen thoughts positive. I just don't think, Greg, you got enough from Stephon Diggs, if you're a Bills fan, to really get what you wanted out of why this actually happened and what your involvement was in getting moved.
Yeah, I don't know that we're ever going to get the answer we really want or any full closure on that, but it was fine. He's going to say positive things about a breath of fresh air and a fresh start, and that's fine. He said nice things about Josh Allen. I think it is what it is, and we're simply going to have to compartmentalize and move on, because he's always going to be an enigmatic, dramatic person, and I don't think he sees any benefit of giving out any further explanation.
Yeah, I mean, we're just not going to hear it. Like,
right.
Brandon Beane or Josh Allen.
I personally don't care what's done. I'm a what's done is done guy. It doesn't
over.
Bother me.
Right. Obviously, it didn't work out at the end. 4 great years, right? And elevated the Bills to levels they hadn't seen in a very long time. Now they've moved on, and I think everybody else at some point needs to too, because we're just not going to get those answers, to Greg's point.
Chris Knobloch, Edmonton Oilers head coach, goes out there and brings up the Bills losing 4 straight Super Bowls when talking about championship experience as they get ready to take on the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup Final. Lot of smoke around that, a lot of heat around that. I believe I saw Bills caught a stray bullet by about 90 people on social media yesterday in regards to this. As someone who grew up back then and was a teenager when the Bills lost the 4 straight Super Bowls, not from the area, until the Bills win a championship, that's honestly still my view of the Bills, is that they're a team that went to 4 straight Super Bowls and lost them all. You can watch them all on NFL Network right now. It seems like there's one of those Super Bowls on at 3 o'clock every afternoon. Greg, a lot of angry Bills fans, Bills Mafia out there. Again, I have a different point of view. I just think from outside the tiny bubble that's just how this team will be viewed until they change that.
There's nothing to add. That's accurate. Like it is what it is, and until they win a championship, that will be the overarching one. I do think having, a superstar player, you saw like Josh Allen on a billboard in Times Square, like there is a little bit of a shift there, that there's more to it than just that, aura of, Super Bowl failure, but they are the reference point when a guy gets asked a question like that. Like, that's not him searching for a way to take a shot. They are the example that people pull from that. That wasn't him trying to mess with Buffalo or say something like to try to do that. It's that when a guy reaches for that example, we are the example.
Mm-hmm.
Much to do about nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree with you. That being said, NHL, Stanley Cup Finals, or NBA Finals, Greg? I'm an NHL guy, grew up playing hockey. I still play hockey to this day every weekend. Love hockey. I know, I'm in my 50s. I saw the look on your eye.
How do you spell hockey?
That's awesome.
Hawkey?
Yeah, haven't you seen Butcher Grass's hat? But what do you look forward to more, non-football, the NHL Cup Finals or the NBA?
So I love the NBA. My family and I are season ticket holders for the Cavs.
Thank you.
So I'm easily NBA. Now, I will say, we talked about me wrestling, because wrestling season was also during hockey. I never learned to ice skate when I was a kid, so I never learned to play hockey.
Fair enough.
So then I didn't understand it, so I didn't follow it. So I've tried to get into it more. I enjoy the sport. I like any competition, so I can watch anything. But it's hard when I don't understand the nuance and like the strategy of it, and I struggle that way with it, but I enjoy watching it and I have a good time, and I joke around about how little I know about hockey, but I've still enjoyed trying to learn more.
NBA for me, this all day.
You have Jordans on. Your 25th pair of Jordans I've seen in 25 days.
I'm trying to be like
Attaboy.
that school teacher, that middle school teacher who had a different pair of sneakers on every day of the school year. I'm not at that point yet, but for me,
That's a big
NBA,
number.
like I'm a Michael Jordan fan from way back in the day. Oh, I like hockey too, and the Stanley Cup Finals are awesome, and the intensity's cool. I just would rather sit and watch a basketball game than a hockey game. Sacrilege here in Buffalo, I know.
No, I'm outnumbered on
I'm with you, Andy.
this one,
I'm
and
with you.
that's fine. We started this during the beginning of the offseason. What you watching other than, now that the NFL season is over on the weekends? This past weekend, I didn't think it was out on Netflix yet. I don't know if you guys are into this, but Godzilla -1 just came out, and I saw it Saturday morning after hockey and told my wife, we're not doing anything until we watch Godzilla -1 today. And Greg, that is the most perfect Godzilla movie I've seen ever as far as the modern ones go, and Godzilla vs. King. This is just incredibly put together, and on Netflix, you can watch it in English. You don't have to read subtitles the whole time.
I don't mind subtitles. I just did the whole run of Shogun doing subtitles. I don't watch any TV during football because it's so hard to prep for all the games and rewatch all the things and watch for upcoming opponents. So I have a list of like binge TV I get to after football season. And I just did those two. I did Shogun, and I just did exactly what you said, when Godzilla -1 came out, I watched that. Awesome movie. Really, really good story. They tied it like it was still a monster movie. They used the original song, like the Godzilla music, perfectly. Really, really well done.
Had like a little taste of Jaws in it. I don't want to give the movie away, but with what they were trying to do and just, it was just a different. You see Godzilla when he was sort of grown up, and then a giant Godzilla. I don't want to give it away, Andy. I know you're dying.
Yeah.
So because we do this What You Watching segment, and I got to be honest with you, I just don't watch a whole lot of TV very often. Like, I get stuck in my phone, and I'm just scrolling through Instagram and stuff, like, when I'm chilling or, like, not doing stuff with the kids. But I sat down on Netflix last night knowing you were going to ask me about this and almost watched the Godzilla movie. And I was this close to doing it.
It's worth it.
Now I'll have to do that. And the other thing
it's worth it.
My wife got me into watching is this Geek Girl series on Netflix, which is interesting too. It's more of a lighter kind of teenage angst story.
I got it.
Where this girl ends up becoming a model, and she's a geek, and it's kind of a cool thing. So I'll give a shout out for that show.
As far as series goes, recommendation from one of my wife's friends, the show called Evil, also on Netflix. Came out originally, I think it was like a CBS show in like 2021. Then it went to Paramount. Now it's on Netflix. It keeps getting extra seasons. It's about basically this group of people, skeptics, that go to the Catholic Church and investigate like exorcisms and paranormal activity.
That's right up your alley.
I love the paranormal stuff. I'll watch that all day long, but kind of enjoyable. I mean, we only got through a couple of episodes. It probably needs to pick up for my taste, but again, if you're into the paranormal stuff, worth a kick around.
Greg didn't know he was coming on for entertainment reviews.
Yeah.
That's the other part of this podcast.
I appreciate you guys having me on. This has been a lot of fun.
So that's about it for me. Greg, why don't you give us some plugs on what you got going on, what you got coming up?
No, I appreciate it. So one, obviously we do everywhere that you're watching this show, you can come and find us at Cover One. We just had a fantastic show. Our guy, Anthony Prohaska, had Mina Kimes on that did a breakdown of the Bills' offensive strategy going into this season, some of the things that we talked about here. But you can find me on Twitter at Greg Tompsett. You can find any of our stuff over on YouTube at Cover One, or anywhere that you're listening to this show, you can find us as well. So come on over, have a good time, and we'll get you ready for the season.
Yeah, the guys at Cover One do an awesome job, especially.
I know, I follow all.
Yeah, Greg, I'm saying this to our audience, not just you. I talk enough to you. Of kind of breaking down things from a film perspective. You got Greg's take on the cap. Awesome stuff. So great content out there. As far as stuff that we've got going on, did a sit-down yesterday with Mac Hollins. Really interesting cat. That story will be coming up pretty soon.
Look forward to that. He seems that.
Yeah,
was he wearing shoes when you talked?
He took them off as soon as he sat down. So really interesting dude. Like, he's got a lot going on. He's an ambassador, a global ambassador for Special Olympics. We'll get into that too. So
that's cool.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
He's really cool. In a similar vein, I chatted with Harrison Phillips about his Playmakers event that he had over the weekend and why he continues to come back to Buffalo and make an impact on kids here with some developmental disabilities and things like that. We'll have that story coming up too. And, of course, Buffalo End Zone Podcast. You can find us on Spotify, on Apple, YouTube, all that good stuff. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe.
Greg, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely.
I'd love to have you on at any time.
Yeah.
And mandatory minicamp up next. Not that it matters this year because Stephon Diggs is gone. Until next Wednesday, we'll see you later. Thanks again.